Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this lecture and to pay tribute to David Graeber by continuing these conversations that were so dear to his heart. I'm Michelle Gloa, and I'm a professor in anthropology and social change at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And on behalf of the department, I'd like to welcome you all to our annual David Graeber Memorial Lecture. I'd also like to acknowledge and appreciate our collaborators, our friends in other departments who have helped make this happen. And those are the Institute of Social Sciences and Humanities, BUAP, the Élisabeth-Bruyère School of Social Innovation, and Rojava University. John Holloway, our dear friend to our department, needs little introduction. John teaches in the Graduate School of Sociology in the Benemérita Universidad Autónoma de Puebla, Mexico, and has written widely on anti-capitalist struggles and the meaning of revolution today. His books, Change the World Without Taking Power, Crack Capitalism, and Hope in Hopeless Times, have been translated into a dozen languages and have stirred international controversy. Thank you so much for joining us today, John. Today, his lecture is entitled We Want to Win. So thank you, John. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. Thank you, Andre, Dargol, and all the organizers, and Sean. Thanks to all who are present. Yeah, it's an honor and a pleasure. It's an honor to be chosen for the memorial lecture for David Graeber. An honor, obviously, because his work was so outstanding, so stimulating to so many of us. And a pleasure. It's a great pleasure because my overwhelming recollection of David is as a person who is very gentle and very kind. And yeah, it's really a pleasure to do this and to say thank you to him. No. Because of the honor bit, what I've decided, I was wondering at first how to do it. I've decided instead of just sitting comfortably at home and doing a Zoom, I decided to come into the Institute and do it as a more formal lecture. So I'm here in a lecture theater with a small but distinguished public. And yeah, okay, so here we go. It's the name of the talk is We Want to Win, and it is a subtitle called How. I've written a text I'm going to, I hope not entirely read, but I'm going to talk the text, and I'll be happy to distribute it afterwards if anybody wants it. We want to win. I mean, in a way, we all do. That's why we're here. We want to win. We need to win. It sounds crazy because we, in a sense, are the losers of always. But now we want to win. What do we want to win? We want to win lots of things. We want to win a host of particular struggles. We want to get rid of Trump and Millet, Starmer, Macron, Erdogan, whoever you like. We want, of course, to abolish ICE, to get rid of immigration controls everywhere. We want to stop violence against women. We want to stop the growing power of the warlords in all the world, to stop the rise of the extreme right, to stop fossil fuels and global warming. warming, to stop the elimination of critical thought from the universities, all that. We want to win all those. And all of them, some we win, some we lose, most we lose. But when we win, that is certainly very important. And nothing that I'm about to say should be understood as a criticism of the necessary particularity of struggles. Struggles, I think, are always particular struggles. The important thing is to overflow. Many of the things I mentioned can perhaps be achieved within capitalism, but we know even then that it is not enough. It is not enough because the aggression keeps on coming. Great, of course, to win a battle, but the pressures keep on. We live in a society based on the constantly intensifying aggression of money against life. And we feel trapped. We feel that we are being pushed closer and closer to an abyss, closer and closer to catastrophe, and very possibly extinction. So there's a sense of urgency, a sense of end game, possibly the end game of humanity. So just in this moment of everything getting worse, the getting worse being expressed most infernally, I suppose, in Gaza, just in this moment of everything getting worse, we need not to withdraw, not to withdraw into a defense, but to raise the stakes. We need to go back to revolution. Resistance, yes, of course. Rebellion, yes, of course. And the Zapatistas are quite right to focus on resistance and rebellion. But let's not forget the third word that starts with R, revolution. Madness, of course. Go out, sorry, go out into the streets after talk is over, not just now, after I finish, go out into the streets of your town and think, how can there be a revolution here? And the answer will almost certainly be, no, you're mad, we're mad. But perhaps it is a necessary madness. And so this talk is an invitation to join me in my madness. We feel trapped. We feel trapped because we are trapped. Any society is a system of social cohesion or confluence, where there are established patterns of relating to one another. Where there are, in today's society, these patterns are shaped above all by the fact that our creative activities are related to one another through the exchange of commodities, as Marx argues. From there, he goes on to derive the consequences of this basic relation through analyzing the forms to which commodity exchange gives rise. The commodity relation leads to the development and dominance of money, the transformation of human activity into abstract or alienated labor, the breaking up of communities and the identification of the abstract individual, the rise and dominance of capital, which derives its wealth and power from the exploitation of the vast majority of people, and so on. And this society, okay, so we've got a social cohesion, a kind of coming together. This idea of social cohesion, I suppose, is very important for me. I get it from Alfred von Redl and his book Intellectual and Manual Labor. But if we think of social cohesion, then we are thinking of how people relate to one another, how things are joined up in any particular society. And this particular society is characterized, as we know, by an extraordinary opacity. Social relations are reified. The how we relate to one another is frozen into certain social forms that appear to be independent, to be quite separate from one another. Capitalism is labyrinthine, a concatenation of forms that lead from one to another and contain us within the established patterns of behavior. A totality of apparently separate forms focused on obliging us to convert our lives into labor. Labor, that strange activity, devoid of any meaning other than the need to produce profit that can be accumulated by others. These forms, labor, money, state, capital, etc., certainly stimulate an unprecedented creativity, which I suppose is the argument, main argument of the defenders of capitalism. But the creativity is perverted through the money form with its insatiable drive for profit, and it produces enormous hardship and profound destruction of the preconditions of life itself. Think of the internet, or the smartphone, or artificial intelligence, extraordinary products of human creativity, but contained as they are within the drive for profit, they are not what they could have been, and they leave a trail of exploitation, distortion, and destruction. In Marx's analysis, the force is not on who or what, but on how. How do we relate to one another? How do we interact with one another? This is perhaps the central point of what I want to say today. How do we move away from thinking in terms of what and who, and in order to think of how? And what does it mean? What does it mean politically? What does it mean in terms of thinking of revolution? So Marx, I think, puts how in the center. How do we relate to another? Well, we relate to another through commodities, money, value, etc. But the how exists, and this is fetishism, the how exists in the form of unquestionable whats. Labor, abstract or alienated labor, is simply a thing we have to do, rather than a peculiar form of relating to other people. Money, as well, is a thing that we either possess or don't possess, rather than a strange, dehumanizing way of relating to those around us. So the fetishization or reification of social relations, central theme, of course, in Marx and in critical Marxism, this fetishization or reification can be understood as a whatification, and also as a process of whoification. The exchange of commodities breaks the communal we into a number of individual identified, abstractly identified I's, proprietors of the commodities being exchanged, proprietors without history, without memory, without dreams. Okay, so the how becomes supplanted by a who. We are contained within the social forms of the existing system of social cohesion. These are forms that identify and define, that contain our activity within certain patterns of behavior. We can all think, I imagine all of you who are here with me, even if you're miles and miles away, that we can probably all think of how our activities today, this very day, are being constrained by labor, money, capital, and the state. Okay, these are the forms in which we live from day to day. These are the forms that actually shape what we do. So that if these are the forms of constraint and containment, then the breaking of the present social cohesion, or the creation of a different social cohesion, must be an overflowing from these forms. But how? How do we confront the how of containment with the how or hows of overflowing to create a different social cohesion or different social cohesions? How do we confront the identifying forms of the capital relation with the anti-identitarian flow of new creation? Revolution, then, is the replacement of the established mode of social cohesion with another, or others, I say others, taking into account the Zapatista idea that we want to create a world of many worlds. And this, so it's a how against how. Once you begin to think in terms of social cohesion, then you're thinking about the how of social organization. And that means that revolution is a how against how. At some point, this how against how is sure to be expressed as a who against whom. Clearly, those who benefit from the present arrangement, the present how of social cohesion, will fight to defend it. While those who most clearly suffer from it are the ones likely to fight for a change. But the important thing is that this how against how should not be reduced to or overshadowed by a who against whom. It is the how against how that must shape our struggle for the creation of a different world. The Marxist tradition, I mean the orthodox Marxist tradition led by Lenin and Engels, I suppose, effectively reduced the how against how to a who against whom, summarized in Lenin's brilliant phrase, brilliantly concise phrase, that power is a question of who, whom. Who is the subject, who is the object, in other words. A fabulous phrase with disastrous consequences. No? The who, whom, in the traditional view, is the struggle of the working class against the capital class, both capitalist class, both identifiable and identified. The how of a radical new form of social relations is put in second place. There is a complete blindness to the question of form in orthodox Marxism and in the Russian Revolution, to the point where both Evgeny Pashukanis and I. Rubin were executed for insisting on the centrality of form in Marx's work. Money, state, and above all, labor were treated in practice as being ahistorical characteristics of any society. Okay, back to our starting point. Here we are, we want, okay, we need to get out, we are trapped in these forms. We can be as militant as we like, but as long as we stay within the capitalist forms, we do nothing to stop the reproduction of the system that is destroying us. There must be some way out of here. But how? It's not enough just to scream. Of course, we all want to scream. It's not enough just to dream. No? That we all dream. Let's do it. We need to win. We want to win. We need to win. Engels was right about that. No? In his Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, the pamphlet that really did much more than any other work to define the meaning of Marxism in the first half of the 20th century. Lots of things there to be criticized, but he did argue that it was not enough to fantasize, that we have to think scientifically about how we can transform society. Dream, if you like, he said, in effect, but what is the material basis of your dreams, of your hope? We know that Engels and Lenin's version of scientific socialism did not work. It did not produce the societies that those who lived and died in the struggle had hoped for. But just the contrary, it produced a horrible, horrible societies that had and have nothing to do with the self-determination of our lives. But that failure leaves us who are still here with the challenge, the big question of how then, how on earth can we bring about a radical transformation of the mode of social cohesion? And there's an obvious answer, of course. There's an obvious answer to the question. And the obvious answer is, well, we don't know. We don't know how. And it's important to say that, not only because it's true. 50 or 60 years ago, perhaps we had the answer. Take state power and change society from there. But we know now that that was no answer at all. Capitalist social forms cannot be broken by acting through capitalist social forms. And the attempts to break the rule of money and capital through the state failed completely. But it's also important to say we don't know, that we don't know the answer, because actually not knowing is part of that answer. If we know, then we tell other people the answer, and we reproduce a monological discourse of authority that reproduces the style of the society that we want to transcend. If we say we don't know, we at once enter into a different politics, a politics of dialogue. Or I don't know is, well, this is what I think, but I'm not sure. What do you think? Already breaking with the hierarchical grammar of the existing society and entering into the uncertain anti-grammar of the society we want to create and are creating. And I hope that this talk can be understood in this way as well. I don't know, this is what I think, but this is as far as I've got. But maybe you can take it further. And what we do know, and I think we have learned from the whole experience of the last century, is that the orthodox answer did not work. The orthodox answer of the strong, organized working class didn't work. And in part because it was understood, the working class was understood on the basis of a definitional identitarian concept of the working class, defined on the basis of existing capitalist social relations. And the same can be said of the idea that the development of the productive forces would lead to a collapse of the relations of production. Again, this ignores that the development of the productive forces takes place within capitalist relations, or more generally, I suppose it takes place in and against the relations of production at every moment in their development. No? In both cases, with the working class and the forces of production, what you have is the assumption of an externality between two moments, between an externality between them and the totality of capitalist social relations, an externality that simply cannot exist in practice. So what I want to suggest, and this is really my second main point, the first main point, and the main point, I suppose, is really to think in terms of how rather than who or what. And my second main point is that possibly the way to move forward is by turning to Ernst Bloch's concept of the not yet. His argument is that the world that does not exist, but could exist, exists already. Whether we want to call that world socialism or communism or whatever, that world doesn't exist, but it does exist. It exists as not yet. No, as present anticipation, as pushing against and beyond, as misfitting, as dream, as rebellion. In his great book, The Principle of Hope, Bloch traces the presence and force of the not yet in fairy tales, dance, architecture, music, political theory, religion, among other fields. And his conclusion is that with Marx's discovery of the potential of the working class, the constant push of the not yet becomes a practical force for transforming the world. He doesn't question the meaning of the working class, but his song to the power of the not yet in so many different aspects of life, opens up a different way of thinking about the material basis of our revolutionary hope. The possibility of transforming the world radically depends on the strength of the not yet, of the discontent and inconformity and creativity that push all the time in, against, and beyond existing social forms. And for me, the idea of the not yet does not stand opposed to the idea of class struggle, but it does suggest a different interpretation. Whereas the traditional concept of working class is identitarian, the idea of the not yet is profoundly anti-identitarian, a constant pushing against boundaries. To think is to go beyond as Bloch says at the beginning of his book. To understand the working or laboring class as not yet is to open up the concept of labor and see what it conceals. The concept of labor conceals its own duality, as Marx pointed out, insisting at the beginning of Capital that this was the pivot on which a clear comprehension of political economy turns. No? So underlying the abstract alienated labor, which is so readily visible, palpable in capitalist society, there is what Marx calls concrete or useful labor, the sort of creative activity that exists in any society. The not yet here is the push of creative, it is the push of that which is latent. No? It's the push of creative activity or doing in, against, and beyond its containment within the bounds of abstract labor. That labor whose only meaning is that it contributes to the profitability of capital. The not yet is an overflowing. Similarly, the workers who are now classified are defined on the basis of being tied to the performance of labor, push in and against and beyond their classification. No? So seen in this way, the not yet is working class struggle, the struggle of those currently trapped in capitalist labor, in and against beyond labor, and in and against the entrapment which is their classification. In other words, seen through the prism of the not yet, the working class is an anti-working or anti-laboring anti-class. The not yet, and here we come back to David, I suppose, is the starting point and in some sense the framework of this. The not yet is closely related to the notion of a baseline communism that is so present in the work of David Graeber, as indeed in that of Kropotkin and Abdullah Öcalan, and indeed of the whole Kurdish movement. The basic idea is that in any society, including capitalist society, any society, including capitalist society, depends for its functioning on the existence of a basic communism, a basic practice of mutual support. This can be seen, I suppose, as a sort of yes, but to the usual reading of Marx. As we've seen, Marx's argument is that the existing society is shaped by the fact that we relate to one another through the exchange of commodities, and that this leads to the development of money, capital, the state, etc. The idea of the baseline communism is to say, yes, yes, but in the sense of saying, yes, certainly that's true, of course, but there is something else that is missing from that picture. No? A communism in which people relate to one another on the basis of need, of mutual recognition and support, of freely shared activity, of friendship, of love. No? And in fact, the nasty part, the individualizing, destructive society, depends upon this basis of mutual support for its own survival. I think that this yes, but is actually very much present in Marx's Capital. Marx as well is arguing in terms of an antagonism, not just in terms of domination, but it has not been widely commented upon. For me, this baseline communism is present in the categories of use value, of concrete or useful labor, and indeed in the concept of the productive forces, all of which do not exist in complete subsumption into their capitalist forms, but stand in constant tension or antagonism towards them. Okay. So hope then lies in the strength of this baseline communism. Now Engels asks, and he's right to ask, well, where then is the material basis of your hope? What is it that makes you think that even within your madness, there's some sense in talking about revolution? Where is the material basis of this? And I suppose what this all suggests is that hope lies in the strength of this baseline communism, of this not yet. And this idea invites us then to rewrite history, not just in terms of domination, and indeed not just in terms of great rebellions like the Anabaptist insurrection led by Thomas Müntzer that Bloch wrote a book about, but also in terms of the force of everyday communism. No? Yes, it's true that we are entangled in the world of money, but this world of money can only exist if there also exists a critical world of mutual support, of sharing, of loving, of friendship, of comradeship. And this, I think, is a central theme in much of David's work, particularly in his wonderful book with David Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything, a New History of Humanity. It is also, of course, a central theme in Abdullah Öcalan's Sociology of Freedom, developed there in the notion of democratic modernity versus capitalist modernity. So this baseline communism is the society which does not yet exist, but already exists materially as the necessary counterpart to the rule of money. To see it through the prism of not yet is to see that it exists in, against, and beyond its own negation. The mutual support that characterizes everyday communism cannot stand outside the dominant capitalist sociality. Inevitably, it is opposed to it and penetrated by it. I mean, to talk about forms, and this is something that we take from the terrific article by Richard Gunn, to say that human sociality exists in the form of money, state, capital, and so on, is to say that our sociality, our interaction between one another, exists in the form of being negated. It exists in the form of things. But if things exist in the form of being negated, that means that the social relations are also a struggle against that negation. No? And if we think of the not yet, if we say, well, this baseline communism exists, but exists not yet, it means also it exists in the form of its negation and the struggle against that negation. No? So it will always be contradictory. Often, for example, mutual support will take the form of giving somebody money, no, or helping them to find a job. Obviously, it is expressed in those cases through capitalist social forms. So there's no purity here. The social cohesion in which we live is an antagonistic one, in which the two sides constantly penetrate each other. It's important not to idealize or romanticize this baseline communism. It can only exist as struggle, and struggle is always contradictory. We want revolution, but it makes sense only if we recognize that there is no revolutionary purity. By virtue of living in capitalist society, we are inevitably damaged subjects, as Adorno puts it. At the same time, the fact that capital is a constant aggression means that we live not only in our damaged condition, but also against it. As damaged subjects, we live in, against, and beyond our damaged condition. This is important when we think about revolution and what it means. Revolution, we saw, is a question of how. We need to replace the how of the present social condition with another. We need to replace the present pattern of coming together through the exchange of commodities and money with a different pattern of social relations. No. The present coming together of cohesion is antagonistic, no, based on an antagonism between the rule of money and the baseline communism that exists not yet. To think revolution, then, is to think how we can strengthen the not yet, how we can strengthen that communism against. So this is, again, we come back to it, it is a question, above all, of how. No, and I want to underline that, because if we're thinking about revolution, if we think of it in terms of whom, then I think we're lost. We're lost in two senses. We're lost in the sense that the revolution will only reproduce the same old mess again. But we're also lost in the sense that if we think of who are we who against the power and the military might of the states of capital, then we're lost. No, we have to begin to think of it in terms of a clash between how and how, between two different hows, two different ways of coming together. No. So how do we do it? And what I've done before, it was in a book called Crack Capitalism, is to suggest that the best way to think about it is in terms of creating cracks in the texture of capitalist domination, spaces or movements in which we say no to the logic of capitalism and create other ways of doing things. Revolution, then, can be seen as the recognition, creation, expansion, multiplication, and confluence of such cracks. The recognition, I suppose, is really the recognition of all the millions of manifestations of this baseline communism, this baseline structure of mutual support. It's really the confluence that has always caused me problems. I've never really known how to talk about that very much. I think to some extent, or to a great extent, the confluence has to be thought of in non-institutional terms, really in terms of resonances, in terms of songs, books, and possibly even talks. No? But one other thing, I suppose, that's really coming through in present discussions more and more, and that seems to me very important, is the idea of the commune as the basis both of the society we want to create and the organization of present struggle to get there. The confluence of cracks, of refusals and social discontents can be thought of in terms of communizing. Marx said of the Paris Commune of 1871 that it was the political form at last discovered of working class emancipation. And I think this is certainly true if we think of the working class not as a sociological grouping, but as the oppressed pushing towards our own collective self-determination. If we focus on the revolution as a clash of hows, of different ways of coming together, then it is clear that revolution is a movement of communizing, that is, both a push of self-determining activity against labor and the movement of some sort of communal organization against the state. The state, any state, excludes people by its form, its separation of paid functionaries from society. The commune includes, seeks to articulate ideas from below and to reintegrate the organization of society into society itself. The state is subordinated necessarily to the accumulation of capital by virtue of its dependence on capital for its income and survival. The commune seeks to free itself from subordination to capital accumulation by promoting other forms of production. The state is inherently racist simply by virtue of its definition in terms of territorial borders and the disqualification of people who come from outside those borders. No. Whereas the tradition of the commune from Paris to Rojava has been strongly anti-racist and anti-nationalist. The state-oriented party is an instrument for achieving power and accepts the present how of social cohesion in order to change it in an indefinitely postponed tomorrow. The commune is not an instrument to achieve power. It is already the expression of an advancing different form of social cohesion, of social coming together here and now. To struggle for a different way of coming together is to communize, to strengthen the emergent, we hope, possibly emergent, potentially emergent social cohesions. Öcalan has written recently that, and I quote, "While class struggle is indeed part of it, it is more accurate to read history as a long process of relation and conflict between communal development and anti-communal development, extending back roughly 30,000 years." I find this very helpful, but I disagree with his separation between class struggle and the commune. I think if we think of class as a how against how, if we think of class struggle as how against how, then it is clear that the movement of communizing against the anti-communal movement, that is capitalism, is itself class struggle. The commune, then, is more, I think, a question than an answer. It is best thought of probably as an assembly of damaged subjects. The Zapatistas' insistence that they are just ordinary people is of fundamental importance. But of course, we ordinary people are damaged people, often sexist, racist, patriarchal, bad-tempered, and so on. And traditional communities are very often patriarchal. So that the revolutionary commune, if we think of the commune in relation to revolution, we're thinking necessarily of a communizing, a movement against itself to overcome its own damaged condition. We're thinking of it as a verb and not a noun. We're thinking of it as a sort of bootstrapping, of pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps through mutually recognitive debate. So back to the beginning and closing. Now, more than ever, it is time to talk of revolution. This is a time of great upheaval in world capitalism, and despite its violence, or as expressed through its violence, it is a time of great fragility. The center cannot hold, it has not held. The space for reformist improvements has become much smaller, and it is likely to remain so. So now is the time to overflow. Now is the time to say, no, it cannot continue like this. Now is the time to struggle for the emancipation of doing from labor, of communal self-determination from the state. The two Davids, David Graeber, David Wengrow, in the conclusion of their book, speak of the, and I quote, the Greek notion of kairos as one of those occasional moments in society, in a society's history, when its frames of reference undergo a shift, a metamorphosis of the fundamental principles and symbols, when the lines between myth and history, science and magic become blurred, and therefore real change is possible. I agree with them that this is such a time. So finally, this is what I think. This is as far as I've got, but I'm not sure. What do you think? Preguntando caminamos, asking we walk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for asking. And I encourage everyone now, if you have a question, to put it into the chat, and we will read out those questions and be in conversation with John in this wonderful talk. Oh, if there's a question in the room there, John, do you want to repeat the question to us?
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I'll speak in my Spanish English. So thank you, John. You said it was a pleasure, and yeah, it's a privilege to be here and listen to you presentially. So more than specific questions, maybe they are just things coming to mind fast because time is limited. One thing about revolution, maybe think about revolutions, like Henri Lefebvre, when speaking about the French Revolution, it was a convergence of different revolutions from different segments of the population. So that's one thought. The other one is that we are dealing now with an avalanche of fascist, populist, nationalist, you say, a cultural warfare, as Steve Bannon defines. And I think we need to answer to that, not reactively, but reflectively, and not thinking that we have short-term answers for long-term processes, because this cultural warfare didn't start with Steve Bannon. It started with Taylor. 1913, he said, let's break the collective. And they have been breaking the collective since then, through Fordism, Toyotism, through corporate capitalism, including state capitalism or market socialism, as it's referred to China. So Paulo Freire invites us to redefine things. We are blind in the room with the elephant. So you mentioned a lot about labor capital. Okay, we know for 100 years, and we think of Teotonio dos Santos, structural unemployment is going to be a fact. And then we see what has happened up to now, where Armando Bartra will say, the excluded envy the exploited. Where are the excluded going to go if there is no creation of formal market employment? So maybe look for redefining this reified system that is our reality. I was recently speaking, I will finish now, with Sarah Van Gelder. She was the editor of Yes magazine. And when she was general director of Yes magazine, it's changed now, it's not longer printed, but it's still there in the web. She was documenting what is already being built in all spheres of social life. You name it, any sphere, education, health, whatnot. So it's not only what is yet not here, but actually awareness and shared information about what is being built, like islands of resistance that then need to become archipelagos of resistance, and so move on. So the idea of rebuilding community that has been destroyed systematically and taking it away from the evangelical sects that gives a sense of community by voting for Trump, for example, or Bolsonaro. So I shut my mouth and thank you very much for your inspiration.
Thank you, Asriel. How are you thinking of it, Michelle? Shall we take, 3 questions and then I'll come in, or how would you like to do it?
Sure, we can do that. There's 2 questions in the chat now, so I will read those off to you and everyone, and then you could respond to the comment and the 2 other questions here. So the other comment is, thank you. I would like to ask about the title. Winning does not adapt the emancipating how, or maybe our how to the capital cohesion, hierarchical organizations, emphasis on productivity, etc. There's another question. Speaking in London a year ago or so, David Harvey was asked whether opting out of capitalism via opting out of society, creating one's own community off the grid, was a real solution in the present world situation. He replied that such utopianism was naive and would even be something that capitalism would accept, people removing themselves from opposition. Would you agree with Harvey?
Yeah, about winning the title and winning, we want to win. Yeah, maybe it's not a good title, but I think yes, in the sense that we're in a situation where the dynamic of capital is not only causing enormous suffering at the moment, but we have to see, I mean, fairly obviously, that it is leading us into a possible or probable catastrophe to an extent that has never existed before. If there's a new world war, it will make the First and Second World Wars seem like playtime. No, it'll be just so much more destructive. No? The climate warming is going on and becoming more and more destructive. The destruction of the environment, yeah, etc., etc. I mean, there is a real sense now in which we have to say, well, we're not going to just struggle over, I mean, we must struggle over particular things, but we must also get back to the perspective of how we change the whole system. I mean, I think what's happened, and in some ways healthily, over the last 20 or 30 years, is that there's been a movement away. We don't know how to do a revolution, so let's not talk about it. Let's just focus on the particular struggles. And fine in some ways, but I think now we actually have to get back to the question of a complete transformation of society and whether that is possible. And we have to do it. That means, yes, I mean, of course, we're all full of horror at what's happening at the moment, the rise of the new right, the growth of fascism. It's just awful, you know, and our tendency, our first reaction would be, no, let's get back to where we were. But I think there are very strong reasons for thinking that there is no return. Maybe there is, maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect that there is no return to where we were, that the crisis of capital, which is obscured by the long-term explosion of debt. That crisis of capital actually means that it is very difficult or perhaps impossible to restore the sort of normality that we have been used to. And in this sense, not just to see the present disaster as disaster, but to think whether it can be an opportunity. I mean, I think we have to think in those terms. You know, if it's an opportunity, then great. How do we think about that opportunity? The last question, that was an answer to the first two, I think, or a non-answer response to the first two. The last question about opting out. No, I'm not saying we should opt out. I think opting out is probably an awful lot more effective than David Harvey seems to see. I think that opting out or going slow is really behind one element, at least, in the crisis of productivity and the crisis of surplus value production in today's capitalism. But to say, no, we must break the forms, we must try and do things in a different way, wherever we are, whatever we are doing, not just to fall into the forms of, oh, let's hope we'll win the next election, or, you know, let's create something that might make a profit for us with the good intentions. No, we actually have to try and think seriously about how we engage in the world, but try and do it through the creation of different forms. And I think we all do it, or most probably to some extent. But it's always contradictory. It's always problematic. So let's talk about those problems. Let's talk about those contradictions. You know, but if we don't think in those terms, then really I see no way out at all. You know. Yeah, I think my starting point is really what it has been for years, which is a scream, but a scream of there has to be some way out of here. No, how? We don't know. Let's talk about it seriously and not just focus on how awful capitalism is. No? Yeah, enough.
Thank you. Here are the next three questions. The IWW had the motto, creating the new society within the shell of the old. It is inevitable that we must work with what we have, and with others, I'm involved in activities to transform from within, including integrating Indigenous knowledge into how we relate to each other and the more than human world, incorporating healing modalities, both ancient and modern, into daily life and community, and lobbying for public policies that are quote unquote outside of the box of the corporate consumerist industrial structure. It seems like this struggle must be on all fronts, from every perspective, realm of social and economic activity. Is there one area that warrants the most effort? The next question is, can you say more about how not knowing the answer is part of the answer? What does that look like in practice, especially in a cultural paradigm that prioritizes efficiency and technological innovation? And then a third question is, would you draw a connection between the Rojava Revolution and your discussion of the not yet and how to change cracking spaces out of the capitalist and nation-state forms of exploitations?
Sorry, can you repeat the beginning of that question?
Sure. How would you draw a connection between the Rojava Revolution and your discussion of the not yet and how to change cracking spaces out of the capitalist and nation state forms of exploitations?
Yeah. The first question then about that we must struggle on all fronts, absolutely I agree. Is there some particular struggle that I would prioritize? I suppose it really depends on the situation. I would think that we, insofar as is possible, we have to start struggle from where we are, thinking of where we are. It can be a territorial where we are, but for most, probably, possibly for most of us, what is more important is of the where we are is what we do. No? So if we work in the university, as I do, then I think that has to be the center of my struggle. The second theory, I've lost the second one. I've got all-knowing is. Sorry, I don't read my notes on the
Sure.
second.
The second one was about, can you say more about how not knowing is the answer? Not
Okay.
knowing the answer is part of the answer.
Yeah, I think so. I think the state knows, the state tells, the state is a hierarchical authority in schools and in universities. We are taught to know or to pretend that we know, which is very, very common. It is very difficult for a student to say in an essay, for example, oh, I don't know. But saying I don't know is probably the most important thing because it opens up a discussion. It's a way of saying, well, no, I really want to talk about this. I want to talk about it with other people. I want to move through that. If we think of the commune as or some sort of communalism as the fundamental form for creating a different society, then I think we have to think of the commune not in terms of leaders saying, do this, do that, but in terms of all of us saying, well, we don't really know. We think this. What do you think? The question about the Rojava Revolution, yes, absolutely. I think for me, I suppose there are two sort of shining lights of hope in the sky at the moment. The Zapatista movement, which has been so creative, so extraordinarily creative over more than 30 years, or more than 40 years if you go right back. And of course, the movement in Rojava, the Kurdish movement, the attempt to emphasize the commune and the communal organization of society, which is always going to be difficult, which is always going to be a process. But at least from what I've learned, this has been a process that has really transformed society over the last 10 years. So yes, Rojava as a bright light in the sky, Rojava that is, of course, under severe threat at the moment of being totally integrated into the Syrian state. So yes, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, to follow up on that and to speak more about Rojava, another question. Greetings from Reimar at the moment in San Francisco at CIIS. I appreciate all the connections you made in your talk to the work of Marx, Graeber, and Öcalan, especially the notion of a fundamental struggle between communal and anti-communal efforts in the last 30,000 years, which you found very helpful. But I didn't quite catch where you disagree with Öcalan there. And then I'll read two other questions. Your use of anti-identitarianism as a framework of working class struggle is relevant to the political moment in the United States. Can you elaborate on this in opposition to capitalist, commodified, reductionist interpretations?
Sorry, I missed the beginning.
Sure. Your use of anti-identitarianism as a framework of working class struggle is relevant to the political moment in the U.S.
Right. Okay.
And then to build upon that, wouldn't we have to know ourselves, our identity differently in order to create something different?
Okay. Yeah, the first question, the Öcalan quote that I read just at the end, I think is excellent. It's something that he wrote just a couple of months ago. I think it's very important to try and understand history in terms of the communizing movement, on the one hand, pitched against the anti-communal or anti-communizing strength of authoritarian regimes or of any system of rule. Where I disagree is that he makes a clear distinction between class struggle and this communizing movement. And I think his criticism of class struggle, and indeed of Marx in general, has a lot to do with an orthodox reading of Marx. So I would say, no, I think that we can actually understand class struggle, or we can understand the struggle of the working class as the communizing struggle, the struggle for collective self-determination of society, right? So that's, yeah, that's what I was trying to say there. The question of the two other questions related to the question of identity. And by anti-identitarian, what I actually, it's a shorthand form of expressing in, against, and beyond our identity. Okay, I think if we limit ourselves to an identitarian concept saying, you know, I am whatever, I am a woman, I am trans, I am black, I am US, American, whatever. If we just assert an identity, then we are limiting what we are saying, and that becomes very easy to integrate into a society that imposes definitions upon us. If we say, no, I am a woman, and more than that, I am black, and more than that, then we're moving in, we're recognizing our identity, I suppose, as a starting point, but saying, no, we're more than that. We're in, against, and beyond our identity. If we see that in the case of the Zapatistas, for example, at the beginning, lots of people, well, were saying, well, won't you identify yourself as an indigenous movement? And I think they have always said, no, we are more than that. Or we are basically, yes, we're composed of indigenous people, but we are struggling for humanity. The same in the case of the Kurdish movement. No? That has also been anti-identitarian in important ways, saying we are Kurdish, but no, we are trying to reorganize our society on a basis that goes beyond these national or ethnic distinctions. No? This is something that, of course, it's problematic, it can be difficult, but it seems to me very important. Now, in the case of Minnesota, which you mentioned, from what I've seen, really, you can see there's very much this obviously same movement. No? I mean, it's not just Latin immigrants defending themselves. It's actually everybody is coming out and saying, no, this is absolutely intolerable. This goes beyond any particular ethnic group or identitarian group. No, it seems to me that is very important. Yeah.
Thank you, John. I think we have one more question in the chat here. It seems that capitalism has become a deity in recent times as a response to the scientific/technological revolution, industrialization, and the decline of organized religion. I would suppose this due to the power we collectively give money and the incomprehensibility of the complex economic, logistical, and financial systems governing capitalism. How do we contend with this tendency towards deifying power while trying to organize revolution without creating a new religion/fetishization that will succumb to the pitfalls of previous ideologies/religions?
That's nice. Yes, I mean, it's not only that capitalism has become a deity in recent times. I mean, Marx, when he starts off, I mean, he starts from the critique of religion, in the beginning of the 1840s, and says, well, yes, but the problem is now that we must move on from the critique of religion to the critique of the of Earth's religion, of the social, the critique of the social deity, which is money. No? So that's been going on for a long time. And yeah, the question of how do we oppose that? I think we oppose that by, I mean, there are lots always, you mentioned fetishism at the end of the question. I think, yeah, what I was saying at the end about we are damaged subjects. Of course we're damaged subjects. And of course we're going to fetishize certain things. We're going to fetishize the party, perhaps, I hope not. We're going to fetishize we can easily fetishize the commune, for example. And I think that happens a lot. I think also there's a kind of an identitarian fetishism that looks to the indigenous, for example, as the great light to follow. You know, we're terrible here, we white people in the cities, but the indigenous people have got it all sorted out. I think that's a sort of fetishism. I mean, I think the only way that we can move against those fetishes is really through a process, through a constant process of criticism and self-criticism. And that seems to me tremendously important.
Thank you. And thank you so much, John, for joining us and for everyone who joined today on Zoom. And it's been really a pleasure to hear your thoughts and this talk today. So thank you.
No, thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks to everybody. And really, really an honor for me and a great, great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yes, I see the question in the chat about getting John's talk. This will be recorded and will be available. The talk will be available through, I believe, through the department's YouTube channel. Is that correct, Sean? And also thank you, Sean, for all of your organizing work and support.
Yeah, keep an eye out for the Anthropology and Social Change YouTube where the video is going to appear.
Yeah, can I add my thanks to you, Sean, as well? No, and in any case, I send a copy of the text to you, Michelle, or to both of you, to do whatever you like with it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. We'll go ahead and close the room down now. Thank you.
Thanks again, John. Thanks, everyone.